At a time when many prefer silence to truth, Bishop Joseph Strickland dares to say what too many remain silent. Satan has found space precisely in the silence of the pastors. In a respectful but firm tone, he makes a direct appeal to the Pope, the cardinals, and the faithful of the entire world. It is a message that challenges ecclesial prudence and invites us to reflect on what it truly means to serve Christ today. A video to listen to until the end, even and especially if it makes you uncomfortable. In a speech that has already provoked widespread reactions in the Catholic world, Bishop Joseph Strickland has sounded the alarm on the situation of the contemporary Church, openly denouncing the complicit silence of many members of the episcopate. His words, pronounced clearly and without fear, are striking for the force with which they question the attitude of a part of the hierarchy, accused of hiding the truth out of convenience or fear. "We are not going to save the world one dinner party at a time," Strickland said, referring to those bishops who speak frankly only in private settings, among a select few faithful, only to remain silent once they leave those rooms. A practice that, according to the American bishop, is even more serious than ignorance. If the bishops were simply unaware or confused, it would already be tragic, but at least it would be an explanation. Instead, many know, see, recognize the mistakes, but choose not to say it publicly. This is devastating. The reference to the actions and declarations of Pope Francis is evident, even if not explicitly stated. Strickland does not shy away from the issue and speaks bluntly of a real emergency situation in the Church, so much so that he states that Satan has found a significant foothold precisely in the silence of the pastors, a heavy denunciation which leaves no room for ambiguous interpretations. In his speech, Strickland recalls the example of the first Christians, recalling how the apostles never hesitated to proclaim the truth, even at the cost of their lives. If the Christians of the 21st century had been those of the first century, the Church would never have been born, he said, underlining the dramatic difference between the apostolic fervor of the origins and the often paralyzing caution of today. For Strickland, keeping silent today is tantamount to betraying the mission received. And he adds, when a bishop knows that something is wrong and says it only among trusted friends, but does not proclaim it to the world, it is as if he were leaving the flock at the mercy of the wolves. It is a failure. It is a spiritual tragedy. His words are not simply a criticism, they are an appeal, an invitation to bishops around the world to rediscover their prophetic vocation, to stop waiting for better times, and to confront the evil that, according to him, is making its way within the ecclesial structure itself. We can no longer afford to procrastinate and remain silent while error spreads and deceives souls. It is time to speak with 1,000 tongues, as St. Catherine of Siena said. It is time to be apostles, not administrators of silence. Strickland does not limit himself to denouncing, but also identifies the deep root of the problem: fear. A fear that, according to him, has paralyzed those who have the task of guiding and protecting the people of God. We are in a time in which pastors are silent because they fear the consequences. They fear the judgment of the world, they fear being marginalized, but they do not fear the judgment of God enough, he says gravely. In this passage, his voice becomes heartfelt, almost paternal, but no less severe. Strickland spares no one and insists, it's time to choose which side you're on. In his speech, the bishop directly recalls the action of the devil, stating that the influence of evil is visible today in the confusion that reigns in the church. It is evil that has silenced the tongues of many pastors. It is evil that has obscured the courage of public testimony. Strong words which evoke an image of a spiritual battle in progress, in which silence is no longer a neutral option, but a form of complicity. The bishop stresses that the crisis can no longer be ignored or minimized. There are those who still delude themselves that these are only pastoral changes, updates necessary for modern times. But what is happening is much deeper. It is an attack on the foundations of faith, on the very truth of Christ. It is not just a question of style or ecclesial language. For Strickland, the soul of the church is at stake. The appeal also extends to the laity, whom the bishop invites not to remain passive. As in the first centuries, even today, the laity must support the truth, with prayer, with testimony, with the word. It is no longer enough to wait for the leaders to speak. Everyone must feel responsible for the faith. An almost militant vision of Christian life, rooted in an image of the church as a spiritual battlefield where compromise has no place. At the heart of Bishop Strickland's intervention is an even more radical denunciation, which concerns the way in which the very role of the bishop is conceived today. According to Strickland, too many pastors have abandoned their apostolic identity to transform themselves into prudent administrators, ecclesiastical officials, careful not to disturb. A bishop is not a bureaucrat with a cross on his chest, he said bluntly. He is a successor of the apostles, a witness to the truth of Christ. Even when this truth burns, divides, scandalizes. Words that shake, especially in a historical moment in which many bishops seem more inclined towards ecumenical dialogue and openness towards the novelties of the world, rather than towards the firm defense of the depositum fidei. Strickland instead recalls the concrete example of the apostles, of those first witnesses who were not afraid to face power, misunderstanding, martyrdom. If the apostles had only spoken among themselves, in private, around a table, the church would never have been born. They spoke publicly. They paid with their lives. It is thanks to their courage that we are here today. The bishop insists on a point that he defines as painful but necessary: the inconsistency between public and private language. For this, he says, an awakening is needed, and those who must lead it are the pastors themselves. We cannot continue to speak of the gospel as if it were an opinion. The gospel is the truth, and those who have the duty to proclaim it must do so without fear. Strickland's vision is not pessimistic, but realistic. He does not call for rebellions or schisms, but for a reform that starts from fidelity and courage. A church that no longer speaks only of acceptance and listening, but also of truth and conversion. And he concludes with a warning that sounds like a spiritual wake-up call. Christ promised to be with his church until the end of time. But are we with him today? Or are we hiding behind prudence so as not to be rejected by the world? In closing, Strickland says he prays every day for Pope Francis, for the cardinals, and for the bishops. But this prayer, he says, is not an escape, but rather an act of charity and truth. I pray that they will wake up, that they will find the strength to say what they know, to denounce error, and proclaim Christ with courage. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment, Amen. God bless you.